The crimson banner caught the late afternoon sun, snapping in the wind like the last heartbeat of a dying man. Sir Hugh Yarrow stood atop the crumbling watchtower, his weathered hands gripping cold stone as he gazed across the empty field below. 30 summers had passed since this ground had drunk the blood of thousands, yet to him it might have been yesterday. His fingers trembled slightly as they traced the old scar that ran from temple to jaw. At 53 winters, Hugh was past his fighting days, though his frame remained broad beneath his simple wool tunic. Once, he had been the pride of England's chivalry, the bearer of the crimson banner, sworn to King Henry's service. Now he was merely the castellan of this minor holding, a position granted through the charity of younger men who respected his former glory. A man's worth is measured by his service to crown and cross, his father had told him when he was but 7 years old. Hugh had built his life upon this stone, sacrificing everything, comfort, friendship, love, to the altar of duty. Even now, with his hair more silver than brown and his knees aching in the morning chill, he clung to this belief. Duty was eternal, duty was pure. The heart's desires were fleeting distractions. Sir Hugh? He turned to find Cedric, his young squire, standing hesitantly at the top of the stone stairs. Lord Northwell's party approaches. The lady is with them. Hugh nodded, forcing his mind to the present. Then we must prepare to receive them properly. His voice betrayed nothing of the disquiet that stirred within him at the mention of Lord Northwell's widow. He had not seen Lady Catherine Northwell in nearly 3 decades, not since the day before he had ridden beneath the crimson banner into the battle that had changed everything. The courtyard bustled with activity as servants prepared for the noble guests. Hugh supervised with practiced efficiency, directing the placement of fresh rushes in the hall, ensuring the kitchens had slaughtered enough fowl for the feast. All the while, his mind drifted between present and past like a boat slipping its mooring. "Will you wear your ceremonial sword, my lord?" Cedric asked, breaking his reverie. "No," Hugh answered quickly. "I am but a castellan now. Such displays would be presumptuous." The truth was that the sword reminded him too much of who he had once been, the young knight who believed glory on the battlefield was the highest calling a man could answer. Before the carnage. Before he had seen the crimson banner fall into mud and blood. Before he had failed his dearest friend. The horn at the gate announced their arrival. Hugh stood at the entrance to the great hall, back straight, face composed into the mask of dignified welcome he had perfected through years of service. Lord Northwell's party filed in, knights, ladies in waiting, servants, and then, finally, she appeared. Lady Catherine Northwell dismounted with the assistance of a page, her movements graceful despite her years. Her hair, once the color of ripened wheat, was now mostly silver, bound beneath a widow's veil. When she looked up and her eyes met his, Hugh felt the world around him still. "Sir Hugh Yarrow," she said, her voice carrying across the courtyard. "It has been many years." He bowed deeply, partly out of respect, partly to hide the emotion that threatened to break through his carefully maintained composure. "Lady Northwell, Stonebridge Keep welcomes you and your household." If she noticed the formality of his greeting, she gave no sign. Instead, she approached with measured steps, her entourage following behind. "I trust the journey was not too taxing," he continued as they walked side by side into the hall. "The roads are better maintained than when I traveled this way as a young bride," she replied. "Though I confess the years have made me less tolerant of long journeys." Hugh nodded, gesturing to the high table where places had been prepared. "You must be weary. A meal has been prepared, and your chambers are ready whenever you wish to retire." "Always so considerate of duty, Sir Hugh." Something in her tone made him glance at her sharply, but her expression revealed nothing. The feast proceeded as such occasions must, with careful conversation, the sharing of news from court, discussions of harvest yields and parish matters. Hugh found himself watching Catherine when she wasn't looking, noting the fine lines around her eyes, the elegant way she gestured when speaking. She had changed, as had he, but something essential remained, something that made his chest ache with recognition. Later, as the evening shadows lengthened and the hall grew warm with firelight and the breath of many bodies, Catherine leaned slightly toward him. "Might I trouble you for some air, Sir Hugh? The journey has left me with a headache that the hall's warmth does nothing to ease." "Of course, my lady." He stood immediately, offering his arm. "The inner garden is pleasant at this hour." They walked in silence through the stone corridors, servants nodding respectfully as they passed. The small garden, enclosed by the keep's inner walls, was indeed pleasant. Herbs and late summer flowers filled the air with fragrance, and the evening star had just appeared in the darkening sky. "I received your letters," Catherine said abruptly, once they were alone. "All of them, over the years." Hugh stared at her, momentarily speechless. "I had thought them unreceived. Or unwelcome." "You never replied." "How could I?" Her voice was soft, but there was steel beneath it. "I was a newly widowed woman when the first arrived. The wife of your sworn brother-in-arms, scarcely cold in his grave. Richard, you wrote that you had held him as he died. That his last words were of me." Hugh turned away, unable to bear the intensity of her gaze. "I should never have sent that first letter. It was presumptuous." "It was honest," Catherine corrected. "As were all the others that followed over the years. One letter each spring, as faithful as the return of swallows." The night air suddenly felt too cool against Hugh's face. "My lady, 28 letters, Sir Hugh. I have kept every one." Hugh felt something shift inside him, some fundamental piece of the fortress he had built around his heart. "Why have you come here now, after all this time?" Catherine moved to stand beside him, her shoulder nearly touching his. "My son is now the Lord of Northwell in truth as well as name. I am no longer bound by the constraints of managing his inheritance during his minority." She paused. "I am free, Hugh, for the first time since I was 16 years old." "And what will you do with this freedom?" His voice was barely above a whisper. "That depends, in part, on you." She turned to face him fully. "In your last letter, sent 3 springs ago, you asked if I remembered the promise we made before you rode to war under the Crimson Banner." Hugh closed his eyes briefly. "I should not have mentioned it. It was the foolish pledge of young hearts, made before duty intervened." "Before Richard intervened," Catherine corrected gently. "Before my father arranged my marriage to your friend while you were away fighting." Her hand, warm and steady, came to rest upon his arm. "You wrote that you still considered yourself bound by that promise. Do you still?" The question hung between them in the gathering darkness. Hugh felt the weight of decades pressing upon him, years of silence, of duty, of regret. "I have always believed that a knight's first loyalty must be to his oath," he said carefully. "To his lord, to his fallen comrades." "And what of his oath to his heart?" Catherine's question was gentle but insistent. The following morning found Hugh in the small chapel attached to the keep, kneeling before the altar as dawn light filtered through the narrow windows. He had not slept. Instead, he had paced his chamber through the night hours, Catherine's words echoing in his mind. "Sir Hugh?" He turned to find Father Thomas, the keep's elderly chaplain, standing in the doorway. "Forgive me, Father. I did not hear you enter." The priest smiled kindly. "Your thoughts seem far away this morning." He moved to sit on a bench near the altar. "Is it the arrival of Lady Northwell that troubles you?" Hugh stared at the old man. "How did you know?" I may be old, but my memory remains sharp. I was a young priest at Northwell when you and Richard were squires together. I remember how you both looked at Catherine when she first came to the castle as Lord Neville's daughter. Father Thomas clasped his gnarled hands in his lap. And I administered last rites to Richard on that battlefield, after you carried him from the fighting. I failed him, Hugh said, the words torn from some deep place. I was sworn to protect him, to fight at his side. You were separated in the chaos of battle, Father Thomas said gently. No man could have prevented what happened. But I lived, while he died. And then I had the audacity to love his widow. Hugh's voice broke on the last word. You loved her before she was his wife, the priest observed quietly. And Richard knew it, I think. Hugh looked up sharply. What? The night before he died, as I heard his confession, Richard spoke of you. He said that if he fell, he hoped you would watch over Catherine. Father Thomas's eyes were kind but searching. He knew where your heart lay, Hugh. Perhaps better than you knew yourself. That afternoon, Hugh stood once more upon the watchtower, gazing out at the field beyond the keep's walls. Soon it would be harvest time, and the peasants would cut the wheat that now rippled like a golden sea in the breeze. Life continuing, as it always had, despite the blood that had once soaked this ground. I thought I might find you here. Hugh did not turn at the sound of Catherine's voice, though his heart quickened at her approach. This is where I come to remember, he said. To honor those who fell. She came to stand beside him, her presence achingly familiar despite the decades of separation. I visited Richard's tomb every year on the anniversary of his death, she said. I lit candles and prayed for his soul's peace. I raised his son to honor his memory. She paused. I fulfilled my duty to him as his wife, even after death. As was proper, Hugh murmured. Yes. Catherine's hand came to rest on the stone wall, inches from his own. But Richard has been at peace these 30 years. How much longer must we deny ourselves peace in his name? Hugh looked down at their hands, so close yet not touching. I have dreamed of you, he admitted. All these years. Sometimes I would wake and for a moment believe that the past had been the dream, that I had never ridden to war, that you and I had, he broke off, unable to continue. Show me, Catherine said suddenly. Show you what? The battlefield. Where it happened. Where you found him. Hugh stared at her. Why would you wish to see such a place? Because I need to understand what has held you captive all these years. The walk to the battlefield took less than an hour. Hugh led Catherine along a narrow path that wound through stands of oak and ash before opening onto the wide field. Summer wildflowers now carpeted the ground where men had once screamed and died, nature's gentle reclamation of mankind's violence. It was here, Hugh said, stopping at a slight rise in the ground. Richard led a charge against the rebels' left flank. I was meant to be with him, but in the confusion I had been drawn away to the center. His voice grew distant. By the time I fought my way back, he had fallen. The crimson banner, the one he carried that day in my stead, lay beside him, soaked with his blood. Catherine stood silently, her eyes scanning the peaceful meadow as though trying to see the ghosts that haunted it. I held him, Hugh continued, the words emerging as if from a deep well within him. He spoke of you, of his son whom he had never seen. He made me promise to tell you that his last thoughts were of your face. Hugh's hand clenched at his side. And then, as he was slipping away, he said something I have carried with me all these years. What did he say? Catherine asked softly. He said, live for both of us, brother. Hugh turned to face her fully. All this time, I thought he meant I should live honorably, fulfilling my duty as he would have done. I thought loving you would betray that charge. And now? Hugh looked out across the field once more, seeing not the bloody spectacle of his memories but the sun-dappled beauty of the present. Now I wonder if perhaps he meant something else entirely. If perhaps the greatest betrayal has been denying life and love in the name of a man who valued both so highly. Catherine's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. Hugh Yarrow! For 30 years you have carried the crimson banner of memory, letting it lead you through a life half-lived. Will you not lay down that burden at last? In answer, Hugh reached for her hand, his calloused fingers entwining with hers. The touch was simple, yet it sent a tremor through him more powerful than any war cry he had ever heard. I am no longer young, he said, his voice rough. My hair is grey, my face lined. I have little to offer beyond a small estate and a heart that has never forgotten how to love you. I have no need for youth, Catherine replied. I have had wealth and position. What I have never had is the freedom to choose my own path. She stepped closer. I choose you, Hugh Yarrow. If you will still have me. The summer passed into autumn, and autumn gave way to winter's first chill. The people of Stonebridge Keep whispered among themselves about the change that had come over their castellan, how he smiled more readily, how the sternness that had marked his features for so long had softened. When the announcement came that Sir Hugh Yarrow would wed Lady Catherine Northwell at Yuletide, few were truly surprised. On the eve of their wedding, snow fell softly over the keep, transforming the stark stone into something out of a minstrel's tale. Hugh found Catherine in the small garden, now dormant under winter's blanket, her face tilted up to the night sky. "Are you certain this is what you want?" he asked, coming to stand beside her. "There will be talk. Some will say we dishonor Richard's memory." Catherine turned to him, snowflakes catching in her silver hair. "Richard has been gone longer than we were ever together. His son is a man grown, with children of his own." She reached up to touch Hugh's face, tracing the old scar with gentle fingers. "I believe Richard would want us to find happiness." "I have come to believe the same," Hugh admitted. "Though it took me far too long." "We have been granted a gift many never receive," Catherine said. "A second chance. I do not intend to waste a moment of it." Hugh drew her into his arms, marveling at how perfectly she fit against him, as though their bodies remembered what their minds had been forced to forget. "I once believed that duty was the highest calling a knight could answer," he murmured against her hair. "I was wrong. Love is the higher service, love for one's country, one's comrades, and yes, for the one person who holds your heart." "Then serve well, my knight," Catherine whispered, her lips finding his in the quiet sanctuary of the winter garden. The following day, in the keep's small chapel adorned with evergreen boughs and flickering candles, Hugh and Catherine spoke their vows before God and witnesses. As they emerged into the courtyard, a light snow began to fall once more. Hugh looked up at the watchtower where the keep's banner snapped in the winter wind, not crimson now, but the blue and silver of Stonebridge. Later, as they sat together by the fire in their chamber, fingers entwined, Hugh spoke of the future, of spring plantings and summer journeys, of grandchildren to spoil and memories yet to make. Catherine listened, her head resting against his shoulder, her presence the answer to a prayer he had scarcely dared to voice all these years. "I once read in one of your letters that you feared we had missed our chance for happiness," she said softly. "That time and duty had carried us too far from what might have been." Hugh lifted her hand to his lips. "I was wrong about that, as I was wrong about so many things. It is never too late to lay down the banners of the past and take up the promise of tomorrow." He smiled, the firelight catching the silver in his hair. "Not while there is breath in our bodies and love in our hearts." Outside, snow continued to fall, covering the ancient battlefield in a blanket of pristine white, while within the stone walls of the keep, two souls long separated found their way home at last.